What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. So I thought I would continue with this top 10 forwards listing. At number 9, just to recap, number 10, just to recap, I had James Worthy. Number 9, Dominic Wilkins. Number 8, Scottie Pippen. Number 7, Rick Barry. And number 6, Elgin Baylor. So at number 5, I have John Havlicek, who I have moved down a spot from the last time I did this, probably 6 or 7 years ago. In fact, everybody has moved down a spot to make room for somebody on this top 10 list that wasn't even on this top 10 list back then. So when I think of John Havlicek, I think of a winner. I think of a player that won 8 championships. You know, um, only uh, Bill Russell and Sam Jones have won more championships. The recently departed Casey Jones won as many as Havlicek 8. Havlicek is just one of, I think, 3 players to have an unblemished 8-0 finals record. Casey Jones was another one. Um, I just think of how he was so pivotal to all of those Boston Celtics teams. Initially, when he got to the NBA, he replaced Frank Ramsey as the league's premier six-man, on those Bill Russell Boston Celtics dynasty teams. In the 1970s, he took over as the leader of a young and up-and-coming Celtic team. He took over as the veteran leader, and he took over more of a scoring role, and he was their clutch performer in the down the stretch of games. It's interesting because Havlicek, when you look at his stats from a shooting perspective, especially earlier on in his career, he was not a strong shooter. He was a volume scorer, a tremendous volume scorer. Like when I say tremendous, he had some seasons early on where he shot under 40% from the floor. Now later on, he was shooting more around the mid 40% range, 44, 45%. So he got better as he got older with his shot selection and just overall shooting. But his career percentage, I think, was 43.9%, which is not strong. Okay, it's not a strong percentage. But if you watch John Havlicek play, especially in the four quarters, he seemed to shoot a much higher percentage. You know, um, I remember reading many of his opponents were astonished to see his field goal percentage and were like, well, I can't. They couldn't decipher that it had to be that low because it seemed like he was always making his shots, at least in the fourth quarter, at least when it matters. And that's often a thing that people don't understand is that a lot of times it's not all about your field goal percentage. A lot of times it's when you make those shots. And the ones that you miss, are they more in the second, third, and fourth quarters? Or are they more in the fourth quarter, when your team needs you to make shots, when each possession becomes more valuable? So also when I think of John Havlicek, I think of endurance and longevity. He was known as the most long-winded player in the NBA. He was constant motion. He was sort of like Reggie Miller or Rip Hamilton in their day. It was hell guarding this guy. He was constantly in motion on the court, running through screens. It was hell guarding this guy defensively. When I think of him, like I said, I think of longevity, consistency. I think of a guy that played in 1,270 games, which, uh, when he retired in 1978, that was the NBA record for most games played. Now, afterward, eventually his record was broken by Elvin Hayes, and then Elvin Hayes' record was broken by Kareem for most games played, and then that record was broken, of course, by Robert Parrish back in 1997, 1,611 games. Um, John Havlicek I believe, holds the record for, or at least at one point in time, held the record for most consecutive seasons with 1,000 points, with 16 consecutive seasons. I think it was the 1969-70 season, I think it was, where he averages career high of 29 points a game. And he holds the Boston Celtics playoff record for most points in a playoff game with 54 points. So Havlicek could light it up with the best of them. For his career, he averaged 20.8 points per game. He scored 26,395 points. With Havlicek, you know, you have to look at his numbers, and they're even more astounding when you consider the fact that he came off the bench early in his career. You know what I'm saying? So when you really think of prime Havlicek, as far as being a starter is concerned, um, he averaged more around 23 points per game rather than 21, 23, 24 points per game. But Havlicek played college basketball at Ohio State University with future seven-time NBA All-Star Jerry Lucas, one of the great rebounders in NBA history. And he also played college ball with Larry Siegfried, Bobby Knight, who are going to become a Hall of Fame coach. And in the 1960 Olympics, uh, John Havlicek was named as an alternate on that team, that great team that had Jerry West, Oscar Robertson, I believe Jerry Lucas. Um, it was a really, I believe, what's his name? Walt Bellamy was on that team as well, but I can't remember whether or not he was on that roster. But Havlicek was drafted by both the Boston Celtics of the National Basketball Association and the Cleveland Browns of the NFL. And for a while, Havlicek considered becoming a wide receiver before he decided to focus his energies on playing with the Boston Celtics with head coach Red Auerbach. Havlicek was a swingman who could play both the guard position and the four position, especially early on in his career. He took over the role from Frank Ramsey as far as being the sixth man, but he revolutionized that role. He was a much, much better player than Frank Ramsey, obviously. And John Havlicek was noted also, I forgot to mention this earlier, for his defensive play. And it was one particular play that has been immortalized throughout history with Johnny Most with the call, and that was his clutch steal in the closing seconds of the 1965 Eastern Conference Championship. In the seventh and final game played at Boston Celtics on April 15th of that year, the Celtics led the Sixers 110 to 109 with 5 seconds to go, and only needed to inbound the ball underneath their basket to secure the victory and advance to the finals. However, Bill Russell's pass struck a wire which was hanging down from the ceiling, and the turnover then gave the Sixers and Wilt Chamberlain the ball and a chance to win the game and the series. So Bill Russell had fucked up. Hal Greer was set to throw the inbounds pass for the Sixers. Havlicek stood with his back to Greer, guarding Chet Walker. But as Greer's pass came inbounds, Havlicek spun left and tipped the pass to Sam Jones. That's considered one of the greatest plays of all time, and is immortalized as Havlicek stole the ball. Speaking of Bill Russell, in a 1974 interview, at the time at least, said that John Havlicek was the greatest overall basketball player that he had ever seen. I guess encompassing everything that he could do. John Havlicek, to me, was better than Scottie Pippen. In his day, he had the reputation of being one of the strongest, if not the strongest, defensive forward in the NBA. But unlike Scottie Pippen, he was a strong scorer, a more willing scorer, and a more willing shooter, and a more reliable clutch performer down the stretch of games. You know what I'm saying? Um, in Game 5 of the 1968 Eastern division finals, Havlicek recorded a near triple-double with 29 points, 9 rebounds, and 10 assists as the Celtics avoided elimination at the hands of the heavily favored 76ers. That 76ers team the year before went 68-13 and is considered one of the greatest teams of all time. After the retirement of Bill Russell in 1969, John Havlicek began, along with Dave Cowens, but Havlicek was the veteran leader of that team. He slowly overtook a team that was rebuilding. The rebuilding process didn't take that long, and by the early 1970s, they were a contending team. They won two more championships in 1974 and 1976. The championship in 1974, John Havlicek was named Finals MVP. In 1976, I believe the late JoJo White was Finals MVP. After the 1977-78 season, John Havlicek retired after 16 years of strong play. And when you look at his resume, it's incredible. He was an 8-time NBA champion, as I mentioned earlier. He was a 1974 NBA Finals MVP. That finals was against the Milwaukee Bucks, back when Milwaukee was in the Western Conference. He was a 13-time NBA All-Star, 4-time All-NBA First Team, 7-time All-NBA Second Team, 5-time NBA All-Defensive First Team, and I'm pretty sure he would have been on far more defensive teams if that category was available the first, 6 years of his career. 3-time NBA All-Defensive Second Team. He was on the NBA All-Rookie First Team in 1963. His number 17 is retired by the Boston Celtics. He was on the 35th anniversary team and the 50th anniversary team. He averaged for his career 20.8 points per game, 6.3 rebounds, 4.8 assists. They didn't really count steals in his career until 1973-74, but he probably would have averaged over 2 steals a game had that category been around his whole career. Um, One of the great performers, one of the great players in the history of this league. Sadly, he passed away in April of 2019 at the age of 79. He had been battling Parkinson's disease for quite some time. A legend in Boston, John Havlicek, Hondo.